Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you all came. And it's really a great honor that we have a repeat performance from Dr. Arthur Kaplan, uh, a world-renowned ethicist. Dr. Kaplan received his PhD, I guess it was from the University of Pennsylvania, but I won't go into that. What I want to say is that we don't have time. He is a professor of medicine at NYU now, and he is the head of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU. What you should realize is that he's internationally known, has served on many national and international committees, received multiple honors and awards, that if I went into every one, I would be here for an hour. That's how magnificent his CV is. Interestingly, he has authored 35 books and published more than 860 papers. It's stunning. His accomplishments are stunning. And he was elected Person of the Year in 2001. And he's one of the 10 most influential people in healthcare and ethics in biotechnology by Nature Biotechnology, and one of the 100 most influential people in biotechnology as by Scientific American magazine. So today he will speak to us on the ethics of Ozempic and other weight loss drugs. Take it away, Dr. Kaplan.
No, thank you. Just one minor correction. I got my PhD at Columbia, not Penn, but I taught at Penn for a long, long time. And I enjoyed both places very much. I got good training at Columbia, and have tried to use that experience as a reason to be back in New York as part of my career. Although the real reason people ask me what I'm doing back at NYU, these 11 or 12 years, is, my wife took a job as the CEO of the Bronx VA hospital. And she ran that until about 9 months ago, when she just retired. And it was a big influence on my career, because every bright idea I had, every night I had to get it shot down by an experienced hospital CEO. So that's always been a limit on what I think about what I have to say. I face reality checks at dinner, going to bed, and so on. So I'm going to talk to you about this emerging area of weight control. Very interesting, full of ethics issues, some unknown as to how they will resolve, because we're obviously in a new space. This is my disclosure slide. I don't have any conflicts with any of the companies that are doing this work, or any entities that are involved in weight loss things. But I do point out at the bottom on this slide, there's an electronic long form, something I'm a big believer in. Put it on your CV, list all your conflicts where people could go and visit, and then explain what you're doing so that people know whether they think there's a significant conflict of interest, or you're just sitting on a DSMB for a particular company. So I call that the electronic long form, or ELF, and mine is up on my NYU website if you want to take a look. So we know, and I'll use this word only once today, that America is dangerously fat. That is not a particularly accepted term. It has connotations that many don't like, but we are the most obese, one of the most obese nations on the planet. In 2018, 42%, or 101 million adults, were considered obese. 10% of that number, of the total, were severely obese. And this is a map on the right of obesity. Every place has a problem, but it's particularly more of a problem, by the way, in the red states, as some would divide the US. And we know that this is a huge, it could be arguably the biggest public health challenge. And I say that even with COVID and other problems, because it increases the risk of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, osteoarthritis. Our hip and joint replacement rates are very high due to weight. Mental illness, issues around shame and guilt and eating disorders gallbladder disease. Some cancers are related to obesity and sleep apnea. It's just a ginormous footprint within American health. And it's going to get worse unless something happens. 20% of adolescents are deemed obese. That's 3 times as many as were in that category in the mid 1970s. I sometimes look at my pictures from high school from that period, the early 70s, and everybody's thin. They're clearly a lot more people who are thin or normal weight or healthy weight than you would see in a similar class picture today. One area to look at the impact of obesity that I find interesting, I have a number of relatives who are in the American military, and military obesity rates are soaring, and they're even making it hard to recruit people into the military. Many people, Americans, can't meet the physical requirements to enlist. Keeping active duty service members in that active status, they do have physical requirements, whether they're going into the infantry or a doctor or operating a drone. They still have to meet fitness requirements, and it's becoming more and more difficult. Double the obesity rates over the past decade in terms of active military. The rate went from 10.4% to 21.6% in terms of not being able to meet minimal physical fitness standards. And today, get this number, 68% of active duty service members are either overweight or obese. So that's people in an area of work where you need physical fitness. You'd expect people to be part of a culture where weight control and exercise and good diet are part of what they do. And yet we have this explosion of obesity challenges within the military. It isn't just us who have this struggle with weight. If you look at the percent of people obese, the leading place in the world is American Samoa, where 75% of people are, Tonga, 71, Nauru, these are Cook Islands, these are all Pacific Island places. And the overweight problem is very big there, and it's big in many other countries as well. Our 43% is amazing, but when you get to 75%, I don't really know the words to describe it. Some of that is cultural and diet and historical food consumption and so forth, but those numbers are very, very frightening. 4 billion people are projected to be overweight or obese worldwide, 4 billion by 2035. That's half the world's population if you extrapolate out from 2020 rates. And I'm going to say, I know this is controversial and not something that everybody wants to hear, but to date, nothing that anybody has done in medicine or public health has slowed the growth of obesity in any nation. It's just a steady, regular, expanding, dangerous curve. Not exercise programs, not counting calories, not diets, not posting calories at restaurants, not bariatric surgery, not anything. So even though there are temporary successes sometimes, the overall trends have been what I'm telling you with, I'll say it, the number one public health problem for the world as overweight. It once might have been underweight and malnutrition, and there's certainly about 10% of the world that still suffers that, and famine and food shortage. But in our contemporary times, obesity and overweight are the biggest cause of ill health together that have been out there. But maybe that is about to change. So here comes a whole new set of drugs, injectable drugs right now, an enormous breakthrough in the battle against weight. We all have heard about these injectable drugs. In 2021, FDA approved Wegovy, the first injectable specifically for weight management in adults who were obese and had a related condition to overweight, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol. In December 2022, Wegovy was approved for kids over 12. Others entering the market: Ozempic, Mounjaro, Saxenda, Zepbound, very quickly following. And there are a huge number of non-FDA products out there that are being used as injectable weight control. These include things like Aqualix and concoctions brewed up by specialty pharmacies and sketchy wellness clinics that are cheaper and easier to access for many people than going to the doctor, when some of these injectable drugs that are approved are in such short supply that they can't get them. But quality control, safety, up for grabs when you hit many of these wellness clinics around the world and in the USA too. But the surge of interest in finding a drug solution to weight control is off the charts. This is some of the crooks and shysters that are out there proliferating fast in the rush to supply prescriptions of weight loss meds. Pharmacies are making unauthorized versions. Compounding pharmacies are permitted to make drugs during times of shortage and are using who knows what versions of semi-glutamide. They don't investigate them, but they're out there selling. I know many people who are getting their drug that way. Lower cost and easier access. This is just an example of a pharmacy selling generic versions, made millions through the first half of last year by meeting the high demand for these medications. All of a sudden, people were hired right away to help the pharmacy. And you can see quotes there. If you question the clinical appropriateness of what we're doing, people in leadership just said, don't worry about it. Some of them took medications themselves who were working there, even though they didn't have a prescription or anything. This place made mailing mistakes, sent prescriptions to the wrong people, sent the wrong thing to people. When things got bad enough for Tennessee authorities to actually show up, the employees couldn't even answer basic questions about what they were doing, according to a 2024 Washington Post story. And there are plenty of places in the underbelly of weight control expansion that we need to pay attention to as part of what's going on with drug solutions to weight. Still, many people think we finally found the magic bullet. The Economist, the prominent magazine, declared that the new anti-obesity medications could spell the end of the global obesity epidemic. Last year, in an op-ed in Forbes, the prominent scientist Bill Hazeltine, a friend of mine actually, said that this was the end of obesity in a Forbes article last year. And there are oodles more pronouncements that despite decades of failure to figure out how to do anything about weight control that was permanent, how to do anything about weight control that lasted, we finally got the answer through this magic drug. Is it a good thing to have an answer? Well, sure, I just put out some numbers I could find. Just so you know, heart disease costs about $240 billion each year back in 2018. I'm sure it's a lot more to treat it. It's related to obesity, obviously, healthcare services, medicines, and even lost productivity. So a big chunk of our trillions we spend on healthcare going into the heart disease. And there are cancer-related medical costs somewhat related to obesity, not everything. Some cancers are obviously due to sun exposure and smoking and other things, but there's certainly an obesity-related thing going on. And so can't really, oops, sorry. Lost something there. Here we go. Bear with me a minute while I get back. There it is. So you can see that if you added up these costs, there's a lot of money going in there to pay for obesity-related costs from cancer and heart disease. Now, some people have said, well, that we have to take that into account in thinking about how much to spend on these drugs, and we do, but I will tell you that financial benefits from lowering, let's just say heart disease and cancer related, slides are going goofy here, cancer related costs, those returns are going to come in the future, perhaps not far in the future, but distant future. Whatever we spend up front, even though we're spending a lot on these things, these expenditures are going to go on for a while. So it's not like everybody's going to go on Ozempic or Zepbound today, and those costs are going to disappear next year. They're going to be around for a long time as the impact, if it worked, of lowering our weight in the US wound up being something that we could sustain. The enormous breakthrough in the weight loss battle is causing a weird set of moral problems, not totally new, but nonetheless very, very important. You have, and I'm going to oversimplify here, Hollywood limelighters, think Oprah, who don't fit the label indication for many of these drugs, competing with diabetics who do, for scarce initial supplies of the approved injectable drugs. So we still have people in one boat trying to get access to certain injectables for aesthetic reasons, maybe for work-related reasons. Think about the people in the military who are demanded to lose weight, and they're hunting around for these drugs so they can meet a physical fitness requirement, as opposed to people who really do have diseases right now where weight loss would help them perhaps cope with or reverse the decline due to diabetes or cardiovascular issues. So you have a scarcity situation with many of these drugs the past couple of years. On November 8th, Lilly got approval for Zepbound for chronic weight management. That opened the door to more competition, particularly for that drug. Lilly can't make it fast enough. So it's in short supply right now. If you know people who are trying to get it, they're talking to pharmacies and shopping all over the place. Many people have gone to their doctor and said, I'd just like to be lose a little weight. Would you prescribe this for me? And doctors do, even though it's not a medically indicated problem. They may not even have a weight problem yet, but they don't want to get one. So you're starting to see some proactive use, if I would put it that way. The demand is off the charts. We are seeing competition between those who need it more and those, I won't say need it less, but are using it for other purposes, and those who are using it preventatively. So we have scarcity driving, if you will, a rationing situation. Do they work? Well, they're new, and we don't have data on 10-year outcomes because they're too new. But we do know that for many people, they decrease their obesity or morbid obesity approximately 20% in half the patients over a period that would be of about use for about 2 years. So that's pretty good. By the way, it's not perfect. There's a lot of people not responding, while we have an image in our culture that everybody who gets these injections is going to lose weight. That isn't really true. It is reasonable to conclude that they could make a dent in the number of people who have disease related to obesity. And I should point out that while the effectiveness is sometimes, in my view, overhyped, it is a situation where better drugs are coming. So there are in the pipeline both pills as opposed to injectables. By the way, a side note on the injectables, no one has commented on it, but the entire world is using injectables. The pollution impact of throwing away these plastic injectables, which are using once a month, has to be off the charts. We had a problem with masks during COVID. I can't even imagine if a quarter of the world, 1 billion people, started using injectables regularly once a month. It's just going to be an enormous impact on the environment, which no one seems to want to talk about, but there it is. I want to tell you a slight cautionary tale that I lived through, a magic bullet about a different problem from decades ago. Believe it or not, I was the ethics consultant to Pfizer, first time I dealt with a drug company, for the drug Viagra. When they first discovered this drug. They were searching for something that lowered blood pressure, and it turned out that this drug relaxed smooth muscle. It wasn't that effective. It did lower blood pressure a little bit, but by permitting the smooth muscle to relax, it allowed blood to flow back into the penis, allowing men who were suffering from impotence to again regain sexual function through being able to have erections. By the way, that mechanism, for those of you who are interested in this, was not something that had a parallel in women. And even though there were complaints about why couldn't you develop something for women like Viagra, who might have had sexual dysfunction issues, this is a mechanical solution to a problem. And so it isn't really something that drives desire. If you're in a bad relationship, you're not necessarily going to be hoped to have a great sex life just because you have Viagra, for example. Doesn't make you, doesn't increase your sexual drive or anything like that. This drug was approved in 1998. It was a financial bonanza for Pfizer, just incredible sales, worldwide demand. It brought forward many competitors, Cialis, for example. When it was initially approved, FDA and the company were cautious, and they marketed this drug for erectile dysfunction. They came up with a medical term after, I will confess, I suggested that they needed to tell me if they were treating a disease or a lifestyle issue. Pfizer then decided to work on a diagnostic category, which became erectile dysfunction. And they marketed conservatively by finding people like Bob Dole, some of you remember, a former presidential candidate, Kansas senator, and very conservative leader, who said publicly he had erectile dysfunction, and used him in ads, quieting down opposition from people who didn't want Pfizer just making a sex pill. And his wife also spoke up about this and said that this medication was very important and had helped restore their marriage and made their marriage better because they got their sex life back. So the company marketed conservatively, targeting a group of people who had a medical condition, erectile dysfunction, which usually, by the way, was related to diabetes or heart disease problems impacting circulation. And then marketed with a campaign that said, don't worry, we're not doing anything outside of trying to treat medical problems that might occur within marriage. You all know that over the next decade, Viagra became marketed as a lifestyle drug. There are a lot of nervous 30-year-olds going out on internet arranged dates who I know bring Viagra along just in case. Many buy the drug online, often counterfeit, often token sign us by doctors they don't know and never see again. Easy access, cheaper access. Remember, that world is already forming for the injectable diet drugs. Underlying the dysfunction, well, they never really treated it. They didn't really care why you were having erectile dysfunction problems. It's basically prescribed these days when people complain, and oftentimes their diabetes, potential hypertension, mental health, bad relationship issues are not addressed. You just give the pill. There's some images on the slide there about companies that sell just online. They don't treat your underlying conditions in any way. So this drug exploded in use from what might have been viewed as a more conservatively managed and medically appropriate response when it first appeared, to just everybody get on this. And we're now going to live a sex life totally controlled through birth control pills and Viagra type drugs that is pharmaceutical. The solution to this problem of sexual dysfunction is we live our lives sexually, arguably, through birth control pills, through erectile dysfunction drugs, and you could add in abortion pills and some other pharmacological agents if you wish. If you want to see a public health problem that got solved totally, not by social intervention, not even by medically addressing the underlying cause, but literally pharmaceutical, it's our sex lives. Will that happen in the world of eating and obesity? Remember, I said we lived in a world for a while with no idea, literally, what to do about overweight, even knowing how to talk about it without stigma. Remember, I started the talk with my one use of the term fat, and there has been a big push to not treat obesity and weight with bias or shame. And so many people have pushed for acceptance of weight. Many of our celebrities that are overweight say, I want to be accepted. It's just a difference in body type. I don't really want to get into issues about health and that sort of thing. You can think of Lizzo as a prominent example of a person who has tried to speak out to gain more tolerance and acceptance, but it's dangerous at the same time because you're trying to handle a problem that, even though you don't want to stigmatize it or shame it, it still has this issue of what's it doing to health in the longer run, or sometimes in the immediate run, depending. We also live in a country that worships thinness and abhors, pathologizes, and ignores fat people. When injectable weight loss drugs become more affordable, weight loss will become even more obligatory. Another ethics issue. What are you doing being overweight? It was one thing to do it if we didn't really have tools that allowed you to maintain weight loss or maintain a healthy weight. But now we have the drugs, and why aren't you using them? Being thin, no longer an accident of birth, culture, a perk because you're rich and can eat in restaurants all the time. Maybe it's a requirement. And that was from Kate Cohen, who wrote about this recently in the Washington Post. And I happen to agree completely about the moral stance that medicine and science may be taking toward these drugs. What becomes optional and something we compete for because it's scarce, if you watch the way Viagra expanded, and as manufacturing caught up to demand, the issue will shift from who should go first in getting the drugs, which I think is pretty clear. The people most at risk of health issues should be getting it over the lifestyle issues, if we can arrange somehow to have the supply track that way. But as companies are building factories and expanding newer forms of these drugs, and will meet the demand, and I'll show you a little bit why they're certainly going to be doing that, are we going to shift to a cultural expectation that it isn't really something, you choose to take it, it's up to you, you negotiate with your doctor. Societal pressure shifts away from fat, obesity, overweight acceptance into an absolute expectation that you ought to be thin because there's an easy, simple way to be that way. A very different message, perhaps even sent by medicine. So I think today's weight loss drugs will soon create, or are creating, an ethical and financial maelstrom that makes Viagra pale in comparison. You're going to see an explosion in the use of these drugs, also shady marketing, online marketing, questionable standards for telemarketing availability of all these things. Maybe we're not going to address the underlying causes for disease like we did with Viagra. Just give a pill. Don't worry about the diabetes. Maybe that's what we're going to do with respect to weight loss drugs. Just give the pill. Don't worry about the food chain or food deserts or fatty foods or learning better habits or doing exercise. We'll medicate you and you can live that way. And I might add, eat what you want, do what you want. You'll just stay on the drug, a little bit like happened with the erectile dysfunction drugs. We've all lived through that. Voluntary versus mandated. Well, you can imagine you're overweight in the military and you got these drugs. You're taking these drugs if you're going to be recruited in, or we expect you to take these drugs to stay active. It's not a discussion, it's a mandate. There's a lot of people subject to military mandates. Certain occupations might mandate that you do this. Think the fashion industry or Hollywood in your contract. Think sports. We don't need 360-pound linemen. We're struggling with weight. We're going to make sure you stay on these drugs till you get down to an acceptable playing weight. You could think about people who work in industries like the airlines, where weight, literally carrying people around, becomes important, and appearance and fitness maybe too. So how long is it going to be before we start to see certain industries mandate use and we get away from voluntariness? I'm a big believer that drug use and medications should always stay voluntary, but that's not going to happen, I think, unless we start thinking now about how are we going to control or restrict mandate use, and unless medical groups begin to speak out and say this should always be done with informed consent. Don't write a prescription, don't put somebody on this. And if we believe that, then what are we going to do about the offline telemedicine world, which is interested in making money and is already making money? Are we going to basically wind up in a world in which we decide we'd rather eat what we want, no matter how bad it is for us, and create an environment in which we can do that? And I'm going to say it again, that's partly what we live in the world of sex already, so it's not hypothetical. It's absolutely happened in one huge area of life. It could happen easily again. Are we going to be consistent in our thinking, saying, well, people want to take drugs to eat what they want, they enjoy what they want, their culture in Tonga or Samoa is to eat heavy foods and maybe to be prestigious if you're heavy, and they can do that if they choose, but they also can decide to keep the cultural habits but not get the weight gain. We're not going to do anything to clean up our food, which is often unhealthy for us. We're not going to stop feeding cattle in the meat industry, which is using about 80% of our arable land to generate steaks. You know that both Ron DeSantis and Fetterman from Pennsylvania have come out saying they want to ban research on artificially created meat. It's a version of saying we want to keep doing what we want to do. And if we have to take drugs so they don't get fat from eating steak 3 times a week or our prime rib, well, then that's what we're going to do. And we're going to not even allow the sale of artificial meats or genetically modified foods in our states. Florida's already banned this, much to my utter incredulity. And so you've got the situation again where we're going to just do what we want to do, indulge ourselves, not change bad practices that are destroying the planet, not change bad practices that cause diseases if we go off the drugs, but we're just going to keep chugging along because it's just easier and it's a heck of a lot more fun, many people would argue. And the lifestyle is one that they're comfortable with, rather than trying to do underlying change, not only to ourselves in terms of diet and exercise, but also changing our food and reducing the burden of current agricultural practices that are aimed at creating things that make us fat, but are absolutely destroying the environment in which we live. So as I said, we may get benefits out of treating obesity, but they're far off in the future. What are the costs of going to a world of injectables? Well, a month's supply right now, any injectable costs about $1,000 plus a doctor's visit or two for many people. Let's say conservatively, it's $15,000 per year per person to use an injectable drug and hope for a 50% loss of weight, which isn't bad. That's very good. Most drugs would dream of getting that high a response rate, but it's not 100%. There are already states bailing out of that cost. Nebraska, North Carolina, Medicaid said, forget it. It's too expensive, we're not paying. They just decided that earlier this year. I'm expecting many other payers to say, are you kidding me? $15,000 a year for everybody who's going to go on these drugs? If 1/3 of all the people in the US went on to an injectable drug right now, that's about 100 million people at $15,000 a year, that's 1.5 trillion a year, being conservative about both the annual costs right now and the number of people who might get on these things if manufacturing capacity expanded. Just to remind you, total prescription drug cost in the US now, $633 billion. This would swamp the system if we decide that the way forward is to live on lifestyle drugs. Now, even if you assume cost is going to come down due to competition, better efficiency in making things, going to pills, by the way, getting rid of the plastic pollution nightmare, maybe another way to use these more efficiently is to figure out who the non-responders are, and I'll say something about that in a minute. And so you don't have to give them the drug because they're not going to respond to it anyway for various biological reasons. You're still talking about a gigantic, enormous cost, just unheard of. But I will tell you, it's a cost that in some ways we pay for our sex lives already. We've gone that route and decided to incorporate the cost. Do companies know this? It's hard for me to describe this to you. Novo Nordisk has become the #2, it's a Danish company, pharmaceutical company in the world. Denmark's gross domestic product grew 1.8% in 2023, due solely to Novo Nordisk selling injectable weight control drugs. The government says they would have fallen back 0.1%. This is one company that is just going berserk over the sale of these drugs. Lilly is setting up an independent telemarketing partnership with an online company to improve access. You don't have to go to an outside doctor. You don't have to go to a pharmacist. You just work with the doctors on their network, and they will get their drug Zepbound to you or whatever else they come up with. The CEO of the company said this new direct-to-consumer option is not about boosting sales. It's about patient success. It's not going to make any difference whether we sell it through CVS and independent doctors or Walgreens or sell it ourselves. I think that's absolutely nonsense. There's a huge conflict of interest here, plenty of information not being conveyed to potential users about diet, about the need to maintain exercise, about options for other drugs, and on and on and on. I can't believe that that kind of a marketing thing is not going to draw regulatory intention. And then, in addition to ginning up more demand, I have plenty of nurses complaining to me and aides that moving obese people around the hospital is a problem. They get injuries, they don't fit. We resized our whole orthopedic unit at NYU to handle bigger people. Well, with weight loss drugs, aren't the orthopedic people going to say, before you get a hip or a knee, you better get on these weight loss drugs because it's going to make your outcome better? And we're tired of the complaints that our staff has of trying to move people who are heavy. The expansion of demand for appearance, for function, for professional duty is out there, and these pharmaceutical companies are keenly aware of that fact. That's the Lilly marketing scheme. Prices. So are they charging us what they should? The short answer to this is Bernie Sanders has hearing to try and examine these prices, but we never get anywhere in driving down prices, even though we're paying more in the US for these drugs than other countries are. But that's been going on with all drugs forever. I'm not optimistic we're going to see a reduction in the price anytime soon. So this financial maelstrom that I'm talking about is likely to happen. Remember Viagra, in terms of pricing and so on, most of the savings went to the online side, and that perhaps is not the best way for treating sexual dysfunction, but there it is. Even if you think you're going to drive down the costs associated with obesity and weight, those savings are not coming right away. You have a huge front-end cost of putting hundreds, if not millions of people on injectable drugs. Goldman Sachs says end of next year, market 100 million. I think they're conservative. I have no idea what the worldwide market would look like. All these numbers I'm tossing around are just the US, but the pharmaceutical industry will not be in shortage for very long. They're building factories. They are ready to meet worldwide demand from billions of people potentially. And even if you take 10% of them, you're talking about the biggest profit opportunity that I can think of in the history of pharmaceuticals. So children, not really there yet, but another category that we have to think about with untested drugs? Should we be doing genetic testing in order to predict the best response to weight loss drugs? I think that's coming, but it's going to raise the cost of using them. But genetic testing, I think, will start to be incorporated in. And we're also going to see people who say, I don't care what the genetic test says, I want you to give me the drug anyway, because the guy next to me is losing weight, and that's what I care about. And don't give me this mumbo jumbo about, I'm not suited to it, I want it. We'll have that dilemma undoubtedly. And there is data already that shows that genetics does play some role in who's responding, by the way. So is the expense worth it? And I'm going to wrap up because I want to give you some time for questions and comments here. So magic bullets for intractable problems are what patients and the public crave. We like them. They're not something we hate, something that lets us do what we want to do, continue to do what we want to do, continue to do what we want to do, even if it's not good for us. Magic bullets really are seen as what we want. We don't like to diet, we don't like to exercise, and we don't like changing our food. What we like is taking a pill and keep doing what we're doing because we enjoyed it. Another moral comment is that sadly, sin is fun. And we often are drawn to it. If the experience with Viagra reveals anything, it's that pricing, proper medical supervision, responsible marketing, attention to underlying causes can go right out the window when the chance to make a fortune is all but guaranteed. It's all but guaranteed here in the weight loss sector. So I haven't said one word other than I think the drug right now should be going toward people who have a medical need for it more than a lifestyle need. But that's a temporary challenge. A bigger challenge is the future of public health with respect to weight, the large-scale administration of drugs as prevention or maintenance, and I think that is very likely, not getting at the social causes, environmental change, or anything else. Can public health and medicine stand up now and say, we still think because of the environmental burden of what we do to eat the way we are, we better fix it. We still think in case these drugs don't work in 10 years or turn out to have bad side effects, better not give up on diet and exercise and healthy lifestyle. Or are we going to follow the fortune and switch to the drugs that are the easy fix that may turn out, by the way, to be effective longer term, low adverse events longer term, and something that if we don't say something about it, there's so much money here, it may get out of control relative to how you access it, where you get it in the exploding world of telemedicine, which I've said is already underway, and we're not doing anything to slow it down, regulate it, or stop it. So I'm afraid I'm going to predict a future that's drug-based, ample supply, issues around how do we try to send messages of health and environmental protection in a world where the easy fix is there. So I'll end there and see if we've got any questions or dissent or applause or whatever.
Any questions for Dr. Kaplan?
I haven't looked in the chat box, by the way, so if there's things there, you can tell me.
I think Dina Davis has a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Ed. How are you? I think there's a big contradiction here between some of the things you said at the beginning of your talk and some of the things at the end. So you started off by saying, as we all know, that someone who's carrying significant additional weight is at a much higher risk for diabetes and cancer and heart disease, et cetera. But then when you're talking about scarcity, you're talking about how we should prioritize people who have diseases like diabetes, opposed to what you called lifestyle preferences to take the drug. But it seems to me that this might be more like somebody, you know, who has high blood pressure in their 40s, and at the moment, it's not a problem for their health. but they go to the doc and the doc says, well, you should, you should be taking care of your blood pressure now, because 10, 20 years from now, all kinds of terrible things would happen. And we totally accept that. So why not go to your doctor when you're 40 and you're carrying, significant extra weight? And as you yourself said at the beginning, it's extremely rare for people to effectively take off weight and keep it off.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
And the
Let me,
doc said, yeah, 20 years from now, you could get diabetes or heart disease.
yeah.
So let's take it off now.
So let me stratify a little bit current demand. There's one group that is in immediate peril. Let's say somebody who needs that hip replacement, that knee replacement, they're not going anywhere at 350 pounds. They're medically, I got to get it right away. I got to drop this weight. Otherwise, I'm crawling around in severe pain, blah, 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 blah. There are other people who have unregulated diabetes. They've got to get their weight down immediately. Their levels of sugar are off the charts. I mean, they're facing death imminently or very soon, morbidly obese. That's the group I'm talking about that ought to get priority. There's another group that you're pointing out, Dina, very true. They have high blood pressure or something is indicated that they're at risk. Okay, I'm fine. They go next. But there are many people just showing up. Neighbors of mine here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, who are absolutely not at any risk, and they don't want anything other than to be 10 pounds thinner than what they are now. End of story. They are in their 30s. They are perfectly healthy. They have no profile, I've asked them, of high blood pressure or anything. They're all on these drugs because their doctors cave into them. They're rich, they're outspoken, they're demanding, they get what they want in the healthcare system. That's the aesthetic cosmetic side I meant. Yeah, I see another hand up here. Sonia?
Hi, Dr. Kaplan. Thank you so much for your talk. I had a couple of questions around, and just a little bit of background. Actually, I have a master's of bioethics from Penn, and so I worked with Autumn Feaster and love all of your work for many years. But I'm an endocrinologist.
Oh, thank you. Next question.
But I'm currently an endocrinology fellow, and I'm concerned about how and there's a little bit of chat discussion about this, how when drugs like this come about, how the use of it can actually detract from addressing the sociopolitical factors that contribute to obesity, like our systems of food choice. And where do we find this balance of, yes, we want to be able to use these medications and help the people who are suffering from obesity, yet is it sort of painting a brush over all of the other factors that go into them developing obesity and kind of detracting from putting more of our resources there? I also wanted to bring up how something I noticed over the course of my training already is that Medicaid stopped covering GLP-1 agonists for just an indication of obesity alone. You have to have, if you have Medicaid and you have obesity, you no longer have access to GLP-1 agonists. You need to have also developed diabetes or either like steatosis of the liver to now have access to the drug. So I have patients who've been on it for many months, have had great results, and now we've taken away that medication from them. And arguably those are the people who, may be experiencing most of those sociopolitical factors that go into their obesity.
Yeah. Well, that's a good illustration of how not to ration or allocate. You're basically driving the poor out, and people who are successful and have an absolute health need, you'd think, let's get them up first, not take them out of the system right now. So that's morally indefensible and untenable. But you can see the payers freaking out over the cost already, and they ain't seen nothing yet. If I'm right, just wait. They're going to really get a deluge of requests for payment, political pressure to do it. It's probably more likely to hit Medicare than it is Medicaid just by political clout. I can't imagine the VA won't be under huge pressure to do this, and I can't imagine that the military medicine side isn't going to be screaming for mandatory use of these drugs. They're going to come back to it again. there's a side of this that has obligatory use, not something that you choose to use as a relatively fat guy in Ridgefield, Connecticut, just because you look better, even though you don't have a health need that's immediate. On your first question, the economic forces lined up behind current food practices are so powerful that the only political statement that has been made in the US is for the governor of Florida to ban any attempts to change them. So you want optimism? Don't come looking at me. I've been complaining about this already, and I don't think our discussions of these drugs have linked either to the pollution they create. Remember, I tried to mumble on about where are these injectables going into the environment? Are we going to see them all in the Pacific Ocean soon, making another island of plastic? What are we asking the manufacturers to do to make the burden of that less? And then if we're all going to decide, well, I can still eat what I want, great news, got a pill. That seems to have worked pretty well for men who have diabetes or heart disease related sexual dysfunction. Not sure I have to get skinny and have sex again. So off I go. If you want me to forecast, I don't see a bright light at the end of this tunnel. I see an acceptance of lifestyle, an acceptance of pollution, an acceptance of practices in terms of how we eat that are bad, and we've known that for a long time. Politicians saying, we're not going to change this. It's unpopular. That's what we've seen so far. And medicine and science don't seem to be able to link this revolution in drug treatment over to bigger social and environmental questions. That's why I'm trying to tip the talk in this direction. This isn't just, if I give you this drug, do you promise you'll still exercise? This is, if I give you this drug, are we going to change anything about the way we live in the world? That's a much bigger challenge. I'm just checking around here. I'm not sure I can see every hand or comment. Let me look in the chat here. But if you do have a question, throw your hand up or just talk. You're all too
Next question.
depressed.
Hey, Art.
Hey,
It's Lisa. Hey, it's Lisa. Sorry, I'm trying to get my camera on. I was thinking when you keep talking about the money, there's one just quick comment. There's another downstream ethical nightmare is the fact that a lot of the people who don't really need Ozempic, the rich people and the fashion people and the socialites who do take it because they have an event, then have to go on and get surgery to fix Ozempic face. So you have all these unnecessary surgeries. That's just a quick aside. Talking about the cost, have you heard anything about like generics coming on? And I can see the battle against that, but is that coming up for some of the earlier drugs?
yes, it's already out there. These specialty pharmacies are brewing up generic versions. Some of them know how to make it. Some of them don't know how to make it. Some will make it in conditions that rarely are inspected. So we don't have, states usually regulate the specialty pharmacies. Those of you who have knowledge of specialty pharmacy products know we've had some pretty big failures on the specialty pharmacy side. Infectious agents getting in, contamination. Not all specialty pharmacies are equal. So if I go online and try to buy Viagra, they're telling me it's generic, and they're telling me it's good, and they're telling me not, that it was made in Thailand, or nobody ever checked the batch, or whatever, but I can get a lot of it cheaply, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those of you, again, who want to know what the telemedicine marketing is, I've gone to the site purely for experimental reasons. And within something like 12 seconds, I had my Viagra on the way. Nobody's checking anything. If I showed up and said, you know, I have raging diabetes and my wife and I haven't slept together in 13 years. I mean, nobody's asking me any questions about sexual dysfunction. Just like, here's some tokeny thing, fill it out, and we'll mail it. So that's the world that we tolerate in telemedicine. You add in weight loss drug access when the when the name brand stuff is really expensive, you're going to see a flourishing generic and somewhat crooked side, I think, of distribution here. And they're not giving you counsel. They're not going to say lose weight. They're not going to say eat better. They're not going to say anything. They're just going to sell you the stuff because that's kind of what some of these marketing companies do. And again, for those of you who wonder, would we really change the entire lifestyle we practice to stay on drugs all the time? I'm going to say the inconvenience of changing the world we live in and the habits we have and the cultures we have, and the failure to really do that pre these injectables. It's not like everybody thought gastric bypass surgery was the answer, or Weight Watchers, or counseling, or whatever. They didn't really work very well because it's just hard in a world of marketing and advertising and habit and custom and so forth to make these core changes. It makes it really attractive to go into a public health approach that's pharmaceutical to people.
I just wanted to add something.
Sure.
There's a lot of talk across the country, the word out on the street from people in the know is that the compounding is often done incorrectly or using who knows what and the wrong ingredients. People are buying things that they don't know even what the dosing really is. Online companies are selling it to people by barely talking to them, as you said, and never sending them anything. Which they're probably better
Another
off that they
problem.
don't get anything because I don't know what they would get. So
Yeah.
there's some studies I'm aware of in process that have actually sent what people got to labs. And there's papers that are coming out and there's position statements coming out from the diabetes organizations right now. We're all working on this.
Good.
Because
I mean,
we want people
so
to
that gets
know
us-
what happened.
that gets
Yes.
us to, the need to really start to take action, serious intervene. No one should talk about the weight loss drugs on the media without mentioning the environmental impact of how we live, without mentioning the pollution side of going to a pharmaceutical injectable approach, although I suspect that'll be pills down the road. We should try to point out that most of the successes are still achieved by people who go on these drugs, but still try to do weight loss, and exercise is not like the data is just, I took the pill. I mean, I injected myself and kept doing what I was doing and everything was great. And remember, I even showed you efficacy that's not 100%. So for a lot of people, this isn't going to be their answer. They're still going to need something else, but we need to get on the ball with this. This is just like obesity was, I think, the number one public health problem that the world faced. Although it's not a competition. If you have some other nominee, maybe it's number two. I don't know, but it's big. We've got to have a public health response that equals the size of the challenge, from patient advocacy groups, from doctor organizations, from public health itself. So you see this revolution that's taking place out in the real world, but I don't think it's penetrated sufficiently into organized medicine, patient advocacy, consumer groups, merging with environmental and climate groups. What goes on with this is part of their problem too. We should have joint efforts, systematic efforts that are bigger, not just be in silos, if we're gonna do this. But I'll end on this note. Maybe we're not gonna do this because maybe we think chugging along the way we are is just fine, and we'll take the crooks and the shysters and the buyer beware, and it's up to you if you want to deal with the guy in Taiwan who doesn't send you this stuff ultimately and doesn't counsel you and undo anything. But that's still keeps us eating our steak. And I'll point you back to a Ron DeSantis. Maybe you'd expect something different from, not something different from him, but even my friend Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, jumped on board. And also, by the way, so did the governor of Alabama. You can see political movements that are bipartisan. How much of that do we have to say we're not going to change the lifestyle? We're not going to do anything. So that's a challenge. All right, I'll let you all, having depressed you all, I have to go get a donut now. So no, I'm not gonna
Carrots, Dr. Dublin.
a carrot. We'll go get a carrot. So food for thought, anybody wants to email me and has other suggestions or comments, appreciated. Dina's comments and many others, please email me. I'm still working this talk around, and I'd like to get feedback on it. And I know I'm a little bit pressing the case hard here, but it's because it's a big issue, big issue with big societal implications. I don't think are really getting picked up in all the kind of, let's call it Oprah type coverage or lifestyle magazine type coverage about what's going on with the injectable drugs right now. Okay, thanks everybody.
Oh, well, thank
What's your
you for
email?
that provocative lecture.
Thank
Speak to you soon.
Can you say your email, please?
Sure. It's just my name, ARTHUR.CAPLAN at NYUMC.org.
Thank you.